It's not easy living on a dying planet, but it is easy to feel overwhelmed when it comes to making changes and taking action to try and save it. Where do you start? Is it even worth it? Can you really make a difference? Welcome to the Tea on Sustainable Living podcast, where we attempt to answer these questions by spilling the tea on living sustainably in a world that's going to shit. I'm Brandee.
And I'm Hannah. And for years we've been navigating the big, messy grey area of caring about our planet. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, but we're not giving up yet. So, brew yourself a cup of tea, get comfy, and let's try and navigate that grey area together. Hello, Give Us Shitters. This is Hannah.
And this is Brandee. And you're listening to episode number 26 of the Tea on Sustainable Living podcast.
Whoop, whoop.
Woo! There we go. Woo from both of us.
I'm kidding. Yeah. All right, we're getting there.
What are we talking about today, Hannah?
We are talking about education and climate anxiety.
Oh, okay. Nice little fun, light topics.
Yeah.
So, that is all we cover here, of course. All we talk about.
Yeah. All the light topics. No, I was, this has kind of been on my mind because I work in education, as some of you might already know. I worked as a teaching assistant for a couple of years, and then I currently work making texts as a textbook editor. And one of the things we're working on primary books at the moment, and one of the things that I really notice is from such a young age, how much that there is in the books around climate change. Climate change, the negative human impact on the environment, the way in which species are depleting, also the actions that you can do. So these are textbooks for like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, like pretty young kids. And there's some pretty heavy topics in there. And then even the parts of the books that aren't necessarily specifically related, and it's not like a science textbook. We also, and this isn't just in my company, this is across the board. There's like a real big push to focus on the sustainable development goals, which are the UN, which is set by the United Nations. And they're, for people who don't know, their goals, I think there's 18 of them, 16, 18. I should know this.
We can find a link and put it in the show notes.
We'll find a link.
I've seen that. They have like the different colored like squares.
Exactly. The different colored squares, there's like targets set for 2030. So, and it's like, life and life at sea, this human, like reduction of poverty, like a whole range of stuff. Some relating to climate, others just like general, like development goals, as the name suggests. And they're like really introduced into the books. And I can't quite work out what I feel about it. And then on the other side of that, what we're seeing, particularly among Gen Z, but I mean, I think probably a lot of us have felt it ourselves, is like climate anxiety. But there's some of the statistics for young people. I was looking at a survey. So this was for 10,000 young people aged 16 to 25. And then over 50% said they felt sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, and guilty around the environment, climate change. And over 45% said their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning. So I'm just reading aloud from this paper. We'll have a link in the show notes. So kind of like the two strands I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Today.
I feel like before we go any further, it's probably a good place for a disclaimer that we are not healthcare professionals. I am no longer healthcare professionals. We are not psychologists, psychiatrists. So while talking about anxiety, and we are not the go-to people for what you should do. So
yeah,
go talk to someone who is qualified. But yeah, we'll talk about it in like our own context. But,
right. And I'm, now this makes me be like, and what I'm saying about the production of textbooks is reflective of my own opinion and not who I work for. That feels very American, but
yeah, that sounds like a perfectly normal disclaimer. The views of the individual do not reflect the views of the company or something like that. Yeah, which is fine. Okay, we have disclaimed. Disclaimers have been made. So, do you feel like how climate change, climate crisis, etc., how it's being taught is like leading to climate anxiety. Because I know you wrote in here, like, it is a normal reaction to like this climate crisis, all those feelings, like perfectly normal responses. But do you feel like the way it's being taught the issues and what to do about it is like helping to kind of combat that, or it's maybe like worsening it? Does that make sense?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if that's, I'm not sure, right? Because on the one hand, well, in some subjects, it's like factual information, right? Like in your natural science, your biology class, right? Like that is factual information. So that should be taught. But I think maybe it's like the difference between what young people and children and young people are being taught and what they see as the reality in the world around them. You know, like all of the information, you know, like, and there's things like the practical thing, like things, you know, there's always the kind of the side of the textbook. And open any textbook, I think, and most of them will be like these days, you know, there'll be something where it's like, these are the things, the problems humans are causing to the environment. Great. And then it'll be like, here are some ways we can protect the environment, you know, like recycle, save water, buy secondhand, but all these things children can do.
And it sounds like,
and do they see their parents doing that, or the government? I don't know. I mean, at that age, it depends what age we're talking about, right? Teenagers have more,
right?
You know, and then children, like, I don't, like, obviously I'm talking kind of over a big age range.
It sounds like there's
so
like
I don't know. I'm like,
it sounds like it's missing the part of like who's the most responsible, because like, yes, humans have an impact, but like if you leave out who's having the most impact, then that's like, it is a very nuanced thing. But then at the same time, it's quite simple. Like, it's fossil fuels and such a few, like, go back and listen to our last episode 25 about how, you know, a small number of people contribute the most, and not just talking about wealth across, like wealthy people across nations, like oil companies, etc. So yeah, if you're leaving out, but that's like a pretty big piece of it. It's like not all humans are contributing equally. Therefore, our actions should not all be equal.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's true. That disconnect between what you see around you and it's probably quite difficult too with textbooks because it's quite politicized. Like the influence that these oil companies have on politicians, and then it gets tricky because then textbooks are supposed to like remain neutral.
As soon as you said book, that I was like, ooh, like I'd be nervous putting something like that in if I had that choice. You know, I'd feel like that needed to be something that was a directive from beyond me, higher up. Also interesting, going back to episode 25. I'm like showing that thing of like being the cog. Like, this is my personal opinion, but I'm like, for someone to give me permission from within the company.
But then, like, there's a way you could present the facts that, like, there are news stations that are like, news stations are supposed to be neutral, present the news, but then there are ones that's like, it's like known that they slant a little bit this way or slant a little bit that way. So like presenting the fact that drilling oil, fossil fuels, a limited resource is bad. That is a fact. You're not saying these few people and da-da-da-da-da. So you present like, this is the problem. But then how do they get that connection? And then it's definitely
presented like that.
But how do they get that connection to the real world?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then another part of this issue, like I was reflecting on this around like education and climate change, was that probably the first time I became engaged in climate action was through school, like was through a teacher. I've talked about this, I think, on the first episode when we talked about our journeys. I had a teacher who like showed us the Al Gore documentary.
An Inconvenient Truth.
The name I've just forgotten again.
An Inconvenient Truth.
That one. Inconvenient Truth. And he took us to a climate change march in London. And like, that had a real positive impact on us.
Was this
and like really, he was a geography teacher. He really brought it into the curriculum.
What kind of geography teacher? Okay.
Yeah. So like talking about like human geography and like talking about. And he like, I don't know how much it was part of the curriculum. I don't really remember. But he really made it like a big part of it.
I wonder how much like leeway
So
he
that
was
was a real
given,
positive impact.
or how much like he had to push for that. I don't know about your school, if it was like a public or private school or
right. No, it wasn't a public school, but I think that's interesting. When you're in a classroom, obviously you've got to meet certain targets and stuff. But as a teacher, you do also have quite a lot of, you do have control over what you teach, and you also don't. Like you have to,
I know in the US,
meet curriculum, but also the way you phrase things and like the emphasis you give and how you interact with students.
Yes.
That change, that you have kind of a lot of freedom around that, I think.
Yeah, I think the way you present. I know in the US, depending on the state, like there are state standards. Depending on what type of school you teach at, you have to like teach certain curriculum, and they have to be able to pass this test that covers these topics. And I think in the US, it seems like more private schools, you have more, like there is no like state mandated curriculum, like it's on you. So then there's definitely like a range of kind of freedom there. But yeah, how you present it, your tone of voice, what you emphasize, seems like it, could apply across the board.
Yeah.
I like that you did that and that it impacted you positively.
Yeah, it was a real positive impact. But yeah, I do also remember at that age it feeling really scary, and you're like, what can I do? And, you feel that tension. At any age, but I think there's that, like, there is anxiety producing about, like, you have less autonomy, especially as a teenager. You're more aware of what's going on and you have autonomy, but you also don't. Your life is still quite constrained by school, your family dynamics, that kind of, I don't know. But then you also like believe you can change the world at that age, with a power of belief that maybe diminishes as you get older.
As reality sets in. Oh, but how sad is that, though?
It is sad. It is sad. But thinking about it, I was like, at like 16, you really like, I could change things. And even like, 10, 15 years later, you're like, I still think I can change things, but maybe not as much. I don't know. Maybe that's sad. That is kind of sad.
Yeah. How do we support our youth in like holding on to that as like tight as possible? Or is it good that you get a dose of reality?
I don't know.
I don't know. You had a note about perspective. Like, you have definitely a bit less perspective when you're young before the reality sits in. And is that good? Is that bad? Is it both? I think it's good in the sense that like it's good in the sense that like it's like things are quite simple, and then I think as reality sets in, you see the nuance of it, and it gets complicated, overwhelming. But at the same time, and I think I mentioned this in the last episode, that like it is simple. Oh, what am I trying to say? I think a good quote here to pull is like, simple doesn't mean easy. So I think that's where like you realize it. When you're young, it's like, okay, this is the issue, simple solution, like easy. What's the problem? Like, let's just do it. And then you realize that they are not the same thing. And the simpler something is, it is quite difficult. So how do we maintain that, like, not tunnel vision, but like kind of eye on the prize thing of like, no, this is still what we need to work towards.
Yeah, I guess because I feel like some of the ways gaining perspective in a commerce is also just being like overwhelmed by the complexity of like adult living, and also like being distracted by other things that seem more fun in the moment, or like, I want to do this and I want to do that, and you have more choices, but you also have your rent, and you might do a job because you have to pay your rent, and then you have this and that, or you like choose the wrong career and you have to change, or you like, I don't know. All those, like, then there's lots of great things that made adult being and living sound really negative, and I don't actually believe that. But like, it's just like so much more without being like, I also don't want to be patronizing, because I also think being like growing up and like pressures teenagers are under, and like school is also really like tough as well. I don't know.
Yeah. But I don't know, bringing it back to the perspective, I was just thinking about our dear friend Greta and how
Yeah.
her learning about the climate crisis and who's responsible has, obviously led her to where she is today, and like led the Fridays for Future, still leading Fridays for Future, and has kind of become the like kind of spokesperson for that like perspective of, wait a minute, you created the problem, but you're putting it on me to fix it. Like, shame on you for like, what was that one speech? Like, our house is on fire. Shame on you for causing it, not doing anything about it, putting it on us to like do something about it. So that perspective is definitely very helpful, because it does like, it kind of clears the fog a bit. Like, oh yeah, okay. That's
true.
This is the way it is. Why are we acting like it's not?
Yeah.
So I think it's helpful to have both. Don't remember where I was going with that.
Yeah.
I think that was it.
No, but it's like it brings something, like that perspective, and it'll be interesting to see. Like, I think it's hard for me to remember, but I think we were, like I said, the words that teacher, and I think it was part of the curriculum. So I graduated school in 2012, so like I think it was already part of the curriculum to teach about climate change, but I don't remember talking about it ever in primary school. I mean, it might be just because I don't remember. It's like too far back. But
I don't remember talking about it ever.
Do you remember? We talked about it in school?
I don't remember. I graduated high school in 2007 and then graduated college in 2011. So I think, and I remember an Inconvenient Truth being a very early, if not like one of the first kind of like introductions to like climate change. And that I think came out in 07.
And that was 2008?
07, 08,
maybe,
07, 08, somewhere around there. Me graduating high school and starting college. I don't really have any memories before that talking about it in school. I don't even think I took environmental science, and I think geography was covered as part of history. Like, I don't remember it being a separate course. So the sciences I took, because I knew I wanted to be a nurse, were chemistry, physics, biology. So I didn't even take like earth science or anything.
Okay.
So yeah, I think there's definitely been a shift. It's definitely more common knowledge for young kids. It sounds like your textbook is for 9-10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And of course adolescents. It's just like they're normal.
Right. Exactly. I know. I think that'll be interesting to see. I mean, we're already seeing, I guess, like, to see how that affects, hopefully in a positive way, not just in extreme environmental anxiety, but like being educated with knowledge, what kind of an impact that will have on our future leaders, and the impact, like as our generation as well, like comes into like positions with more power, kind of an impact that we'll have, and hopefully it's a positive one.
Yeah, I just can't help but go back to like, if textbooks, teachers, schools are like just teaching the facts and this is the problem and these are solutions, but leaving out all of the in between. If like kids aren't getting that kind of filled in somewhere, aren't getting that connection made of who is more responsible, then I can definitely see that how that would be more likely to lead to some climate anxiety, because seeing that it seems it's a huge disconnect between the reality of the situation. Yeah. Because it's easy to just say, here's a problem, here's what we can do. And again, that's assuming that the playing field is completely equal, and it's not. So yeah.
And I think, and that's probably also, unfortunately, the area that, as we already said, like for wherever you are in education, because it is political, that's the area where people are most nervous to talk or to put something in paper, because then you're like, and it's hard to find the exact, you have to make sure what you're presenting is like factual. Right. But I don't know if there's a way that like teachers could, I don't know how to phrase this, like create. I'm sure there is, but it's probably the harder Sorry, carry on.
No, yeah, it's definitely not the easier path to just teach what you're supposed to. But if there's a way to kind of, I don't know how to phrase this, not like set the stage, but like encourage students to kind of do research on their own or have conversations with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
What do they say? Like in teaching, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So is there a way to they can kind of present the facts in a way that like kind of piques their interest and like makes them curious to find out more and have them seek that from like friends and family and having more conversations? Because that, I think that's where that connection will be made and the gaps will be filled. So if you're listening and you have kids, have conversations. I guess would be a good thing to recommend. I think just having conversations in general and being open-minded and curious and is always a good thing. So I don't know.
And it is this, I'm just like looking at, it's in this National Geographic article that we'll link in the show notes. And this is kind of more anecdotal. And this just kind of talking about anxiety and this like disconnect. So there's this part where someone called Emily Balketis, I don't know how to pronounce her surname, was talking about, and she's 42, she was talking about the generational divide in her own home. And she said, so this is a quote from the article. She said, if the subject of climate change seemed too abstract for kids in the 1990s, times have changed, as Balketis was starkly reminded one evening when she set dinner on the table in a disposable container. Burst into tears. Mum, we can't reuse or recycle this plate, he cried. That hit me really hard. She said, I'm of the older generation that doesn't feel that angst. Matty is 4. So like, I don't know. Yeah, it's like intense. It's this like how like there's such a strong focus within education to teach about climate change. And, it's like, and I think it's also easy for people to sort of do a throwaway thing, right? We should recycle and, like, oh, we're making this craft today, kids. Like we're using recycled materials, like the easy stuff.
Which is not the heart of the issue. Has an impact and it's not the heart of the issue. Yeah. Right.
And it's like, that goes back exactly to our last episode of that, like individual versus and that, the last couple of episodes, actually, we've been talking about that individual versus corporate action. But on the other hand, I do still feel, it is important that we're educating about this.
Yeah, but I think it could be improved. Like, I mean, like most things, like, you have like version 1, version 2, version 3. Okay, you're teaching it great, but like, how do we do that? How do educators present this issue in a way that informs, educates, but then also like supports the student, the kid in, and the feelings that brings up? Is it conversations with the parents? This is what we're teaching. Here's maybe some suggested ways to, I don't know.
Right.
To support your kid through this unit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not well versed
in
just
being very aware
and
of the impact. And I guess being aware that I think a lot of people our age do, and old, people do have significant climate anxiety at all ages. I don't think that's just for young people, but perhaps we haven't grown up with it so strongly. So we do have the tools to disconnect from that for good and for bad. And being really aware, especially like, your brains are developed where you understand information is different. That this is like a real issue.
And when you're younger, everything feels more, feels bigger.
Right. And you don't have the power at that age. You can't change things.
Or tools to
you
process
can,
them.
you can, but right. It's like, I don't know.
We can't all be Greta.
Right. But yeah, I'd love to hear any of our listeners or do any of you work in education or with children, young adults? Are you a young adult?
Yeah. Or what was
this? Like, what do you feel?
What was your experience in education?
did you grow up, were you taught about climate change
Mm-hmm.
at school? Like, when do you remember it, when you first
Mm-hmm.
come across it?
Yeah. Let us know. You can always let us know on Instagram at the Tea on Sustainable Living, but also a voice note. Just go to the website and hit contact, theteaonsustainableliving.com, and then you can leave like a voice note. Because I'd love to hear like what was your experience growing up, like in education, what were you taught about climate, and like how do you think that's like impacted you? Yeah, so let us know. And Hannah, I encourage you to maybe ask more questions at work. If like you see, if you're working on a textbook and you see this, okay, planet's dying, recycle. I don't know. May ask a question like, is there a way we can provide more info? I don't know how much.
No,
your comfort level
sure.
is,
and like it's something. For me, I don't work on science textbooks, but we do have the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of the things, I don't know if this is a good or bad, but my co-editor and we decided we wanted to try and focus on like the positives related to those goals.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, kind of what we did in the love letter to the planet. Like, it doesn't all need to be like doom and gloom. Like, why do we like love like life on land?
Mm-hmm.
That was an approach we decided to take.
And then if you want to preserve that, to encourage then.
Yeah. But
I like that.
Yeah, it's easy to give information without being fully like, how is that actually, like, how is this going to be responded to in a classroom? Is the teacher going to be able to give sufficient time to, especially like in a textbook situation, you're often putting like, did you know? And then like, I don't know, did you know if this is a random example, but like, if the bees die out, we'll lose like a third of our grains, like, woo, like there's a actual figure in there somewhere. I'm not like, but like it's really easy to put these like bites in, and I'm like thinking, I'm like, as a kid reading that was like 9 years old,
versus something
that
like
could be, it's versus an actual lesson where you like go through something, or versus like, did you know we have like X amount of like species, like our planet can sustain so many varieties of plants and animals, like isn't that cool?
Or even the bee one, like did you know if you maybe consumed local honey, or if you, I don't know, something shifting it to the positive, that you would have less of an impact on, I don't know, the depletion of the bees, or I don't know, some way to like spin it positively. If I had more time to think, I could phrase that better. But did you know if you did this thing, you would have this positive impact? Yeah. That's what I'm trying to get. Instead of, did you know that, if we lose our bees. Anyway, I think the point was made. So,
But I think, it's an interesting issue. And I would really love to hear our listeners' thoughts.
Yeah, me too. And I was just thinking it'd be a good like follow-up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on. No,
I was just thinking that there could be a good follow-up episode about like just education in general, like how much, I don't know, to educate ourselves versus like doing something about it. Like it's easy to get caught up in just like learning, which is good. Learning's good. But then if you're also wanting to do something about it, like, how do you learn enough, educate yourself enough to do something? I don't know. Just the beginning thoughts there. We'll see if it turns into to an outline. All right. Yeah. Let us know. Give a shitter what you think about education and teaching climate change, teaching about the climate crisis in schools, what your experience was. Over on our website, theteaonsustainableliving.com/contact. Or you can comment directly on this episode. I forget that comments are turned on because they are technically blog posts. So theteaonsustainableliving.com/episode 26. Yeah. That's a good place to leave it.
All right.
See you in the next one.
I was waiting. I was like, am I going to have to do it this way? No.
No, I got you. Don't worry.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Tea on Sustainable Living podcast.
Now, go share it with a friend,
a coworker,
a partner,
a family member,
or whoever.
A pet, your cat,
someone on the street. Whoever you think could use a little more support on their sustainability journey. Share it.
You can send them over to our website, theteaunsustainableliving.com. And while you're there, check out the show notes for more info on today's topic.
All right, give a shitters. See you later. Get it? See you later, as in see you later. So funny.
Brandee.